The answer to this question might surprise you because it has nothing to do with watercolor. And at the same time, it has everything to do with watercolor. And just before I go right into the topic of this video, just so that you know if I'm legit or not, these are the paintings that my students did. I helped them do these paintings, these watercolor paintings, without any tutorials. And as you can see, they found their own style. Here is another example of also watercolor paintings from my students. It's not from me. These are all my students. I gave them no advice, no tutorial. They just did that from their own topic, their own subject, their own photos. So this sets the tone so that you know now if you might listen to me. And you will see at the end of this video the link with watercolor and how you also can find your own watercolor style. It all started with a question I had from someone who asked me, okay, what really happened after your 15 years as an employee? You decided to live by yourself and try to make a living from your passion, which was watercolor at that time. And it still is, by the way. I was about to answer something like, yeah, I just wanted to live another life. I just wanted to live by myself and so on. And then he said to me, you know, I don't want the official answer that is socially accepted. I want the real truth, the raw thing. And when he asked me that, I told him, wow, yeah, actually, I didn't want to live from my passion. When I decided to create this watercolor kind of business, it was some moments in my life where I realized that something was missing, something was off, something was wrong. Yeah, I don't know if you follow me here, but as an employee, there was some moments where, for example, and it could be something very trivial, like I could see myself in the office walking around, and at one point, just a thought crossed my mind, and this thought was about, I don't want to be here, and it was even stronger than that. It's, I don't want this life. I don't want this life. I don't want to talk to my colleagues. I'm a lonely wolf. I don't want to be there. I don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. in order to take my shower, to brush my teeth, to make everything that fits society's standard. I don't want that. Those kind of moments, they defined what I didn't want. And usually when we talk about watercolor style, what do you want to do? Oh, I want a loose style. Oh, I want to paint gorgeous skies in watercolor. Yes, of course, we all want that. But at the same time, how do you get there? You don't know. And thing is that you can create a fantasy that has nothing to do with reality, with what you experience in real life. When you try to mimic, when you try to replicate someone else's techniques, you don't know that. You don't know if you are going to love it. Because what you want is the outcome. But thing is that I didn't find my watercolor style by trying to mimic or trying to imitate someone else, because it doesn't work. When you try to go through someone else's path, it doesn't work because you don't know what they experience. You don't have their life experience. You don't have, how do we say that, their skills, because you are going to encounter issues that they didn't encounter. And you also are going to overcome issues that they encounter, but you don't encounter. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that some moments, we can call them defining moments, they are not defining what you want. Because these kind of moments are quite rare. Of course, you can be on holiday, you can be on vacation, and life is perfect. But it's not actually what you really want. Because sometimes it's just compensation. You try to compensate your life with vacation and so on. And so it's a kind of relief. But what you really want, I found myself struggling with that. It's really difficult. But some defining moments where you got bullied, where you realized, oh, this is something that I don't want, and it could last like a few seconds. Those kind of moments, it defines what you don't want. And from that moment, I decided, and I think that those kind of moments, they played a huge role, and unconsciously, because when I decided to quit my job, I didn't know exactly, okay, this is for this reason, I was bullied at this time, I was in this building at 2 a.m. We don't know that. Looking backwards, they played a huge role into this decision-making process of, no, I don't want this life anymore. I don't want to talk to my colleague anymore. I don't want to work this with people anymore. I want to live my own thing. At first, you can say, oh, okay, he quit his job in order to live from his passion, but the real reason is not there. The real reason is, I didn't want to live those defining moments anymore because I was suffocating. And thing is that when you make the decision, it's kind of you craft another way into your life. You have this life defined by the standards of society, and you have another path that is created by your decision. And this other path, I find myself not knowing exactly what I really wanted to do, but I knew exactly what I didn't want to experience again. And this is exactly my point here. Those defining moments where you make the decision based on some moments in your life where you realize, okay, no, I don't want that anymore. They create another fork in your life. And this fork is where you craft your life. But you don't know exactly what you are going to craft. But you know exactly what you are going to avoid. And in watercolor, it's exactly the same. At first, I didn't know what I really wanted to create. I saw some beautiful watercolors from very famous watercolorists like Joseph Zbukvich, like Thomas Schaller, like Alvaro Castañet. I couldn't paint like them. Of course, I didn't have their life experience and so on and so on. But when you look back at what I just shared, you can see that I couldn't do the same thing as them, but I could ask myself what I don't want to experience in watercolor again. And this is exactly my point. Because just for example, I remember having a live with my students about this watercolor painting. And it was a watercolor painting that I already created with them. I showed them everything, how they can replicate this watercolor painting through these techniques in order to make the sea. Another one here in order to make the waves. Here is how to make the sand. And here is how to make the rocks. And in the end, you can create the whole painting here in minutes. So yeah, okay, it was fine. And the students, they loved this live. At first, it was exciting to be there with them because I could share my techniques. They could have great results from them. And I did those kind of lives for 1 year based on my already painted watercolors. I created a course around one specific painting, and I could split it into small exercises like this one. This is someone that you can paint on top of the rock. This is how you paint the waves. This is how you paint the sand, and so on, so that then they can assemble everything. They can gather all these pieces together so in order to create the whole watercolor painting. So people loved this concept so much. But at the same time, after 1 year doing that, I couldn't stand it anymore because it was like forcing myself, teaching techniques that, yes, of course, it could help people, but in the end, I wasn't having fun anymore. And this is exactly the kind of moments where I could have kept on doing those kind of lives for years and years in order to make a living from my passion. But in the end, what matters the most is what you experience emotionally. And for those lives, in the end, after making like, I can't remember, but I did like 40 or 50 lives like that. I couldn't stand them anymore because I didn't want to share my techniques anymore. I wanted to create something, and I didn't have the feeling that I created something based on those lives anymore. At first, yes. And this is when you see that your style of not creating your watercolor, but conducting, leading your life, it evolves over time. This is when you start creating another fork and you start moving forward your real style. But you don't know exactly what you are going to do, but you know exactly what you are moving away from. And now here are the lives that I do with my students, because I don't want to just copy another painting that I already did. I wanted to create something new. This is when now what I do during those lives is I take pictures, photos from my students, and I tell them, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to succeed, I don't know if I'm going to fail, but whatever, let's try something. Let's try to interpret this kind of photo in watercolor. And this is when I share the techniques and so on. But by doing so, I realized that I loved it. I love this kind of doing so much more because I don't have the feeling that I repeat myself. I don't have the feeling that I'm in an already conquered territory. If I don't know if you know what I mean, but now it's something that is completely new. Every single topic, let me show you another one. Okay, this is another photo from my students. And I didn't really, when I looked at this one, I didn't know if it would work or not. So I told them, I don't know if it's going to work, but let's try. And we tried, and in the end, the students had told me, wow, this is beautiful. But what's exciting for me is that I don't know what I'm going to come up with. And this is exactly, and you can see I'm smiling by telling you that. And this is exactly the point here. By listening to yourself, listening to, do I like that or not? Do I want to experience that again or not? You can then craft a life, you can craft a business, you can craft a painting, but this time your own way. Not knowing exactly what you are going to obtain in the end, but knowing exactly what you don't want to experience again. And what I didn't want to experience is repeat myself. But here, I don't have the feeling that I repeat myself. And oftentimes, people think that in order to find your style in watercolor, you have to know what you want. But the truth is that when I started watercolor, I didn't know what I wanted. When I started watercolor, I knew what I wanted to avoid. And what I wanted to avoid is not being like everyone else, not being another employee in this huge company. I didn't want that anymore. And this is when I found watercolor. So you can see that in your life, look at all the moments that defined what you didn't want to experience, what you didn't want to live anymore. And by doing so, you have two options. First is to shut up and to live your life the way the society wants you to live. And this is when you are going to mimic someone else, you are going to copy the watercolor tutorials, and exactly the same mechanism. It's exactly the same pattern. You are going to mimic someone else, you are going to follow someone else's path, and you are going to end up in a place where you don't want to be. And you are going to repeat this cycle again and again until you realize, okay, but this moment, every single time, I was at the wrong place and I don't want that anymore. And at that moment, you will make a decision in your life. And this is a second option. You make a decision to not live what you already lived again. And from that moment, you open a door where you have the opportunity to find your own style. And whether it be your lifestyle or your watercolor style. And this is exactly how I find my own style in watercolor. Because I don't want to go too much into the details. This is something that I couldn't stand. And by realizing that, I made everything to know exactly how I could paint in a loose way. And I didn't follow any tutorials in order to do that, because the drive to not live, okay, I go too much into the detail. It was so painful that at one point I decided to move forward and to create my own path, even though I didn't know where I'm going to land. So I know that it's not about a watercolor technique, it's not about composition, but at the beginning of this video I told you that the answer to but I think I deeply think that the real truth is exactly what I told you. The real truth in finding your own watercolor style is by going back into the moments in your life when you realize that you didn't want this life anymore, you didn't want to experience this watercolor practice anymore, and this is when you try to look for another solution. And by doing that, you open the door where you can now craft exactly your own path. And this is exactly what I teach to my students. That's why I'm not into the watercolor tutorials. And before teaching them all the techniques that allowed me to do this kind of interpretation in watercolor, I think that this video is the most important you can watch in order to find your own path, not only in watercolor, but also in your life. And if you want to know more about that, click on the link in the description below. Thank you for watching.